My inner critic used to be the loudest voice in my head. It told me I wasn't smart enough, that I didn't deserve success, and that I was going to fail. And for years, I believed it. That voice was a constant narrator of my life, pointing out every mistake and every flaw. Honestly, it was exhausting. Maybe you can resonate. But what if I told you that you can silence that voice? In this week's episode of Let's Talk Confidence, I'm going to show you the exact process I used to go from being my own worst enemy to my biggest supporter. Welcome to Let's Talk Confidence, the first and last place you need to go to build long-lasting confidence. I'm your host and coach, Josh Sutton. Please do give us a like, follow, review, and share it with someone you know needs to hear this message today, as that's the only way I can grow, we can benefit more and more people. You'd be really appreciated. Let's dive into today's episode. One of the reasons I'm so passionate about helping people with their confidence today is because of the journey that I've been on myself. So, I'm going to be a little bit open with today, just to share my message. I didn't have a really traumatic childhood that I carried with me. My lack of confidence actually began around 16 or 17. I'd found things quite easy up to that point. I was popular at school, somewhat intelligent. I picked things up pretty easily. In fact, my childhood really set me up for a confident life. Yet all of this was based on the environment that I was in at the time, school. And when I left at 16 and joined a bank, I realised that my confidence was based on how I thought other people saw me, which at school was a good thing. Being a fast runner, wearing the right clothing, that was all good and well at school, but it didn't translate very well to building confidence in the adult world in the middle of a banking branch in Wolverhampton. I started to feel like a total fraud. I'd be sitting in a meeting with this great idea in my head, but my inner critic, just out of nowhere, would start pulling me down, immediately say things like, "Don't say that, stupid idea. What have you got to offer? They'll think you're an idiot." So I began to stay silent. And then I'd watch someone else bring up a similar idea minutes later and get praised for it. And this like, kind of wave of shame and regret would just wash over me. My inner critic would then chime in again. It would say things like, "See, told you, you missed your chance. You're too slow, too scared." This built for a while, and it stopped just being at work. It seeped into everything. I loved playing guitar for several years by the point I joined the bank, and it was nothing serious. I just enjoyed jamming with friends. But I started to notice that here too, I was beginning to doubt myself. The fear of not playing every note perfectly became overwhelming to the point of not wanting to play at all, and so the guitars began to collect dust. The critic convinced me that avoiding failure was safer than trying to succeed. This became a vicious cycle. The less I did, the more I proved this critic right. Socially, I was a mess. I'd get invited to parties, and the anxiety that was building was suffocating, and yet a couple of years earlier, I was fine. My critic would go into overdrive, dissecting everything, thinking you're going to be awkward, people will see you in a different light, you won't know what to say, people will judge what you're thinking, what you're doing, what you're wearing, and they'll see how insecure you are. I'd begin to cancel at the last minute, blaming a headache or busy schedule or I'm at work, when in reality I was just too afraid to show up and be seen. On the rare occasions I did go out, I would mentally replay every conversation I had afterwards, cringing at every word I said. It was like a self imposed prison of comparison and judgment. To stop this seeping into every area of my life, I knew that something different needed to be done. For every big change, there's a moment where the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the fear of the unknown. And for me, that moment wasn't a slow, gentle awakening, it was a crash. I've been working on a huge project at my job in the bank for many months. It's one of those high stakes assignment that could lead to a big promotion if it went well. I poured everything into it, late nights, weekends, you name it. Even though my inner critic was screaming that I wasn't up to the task by that point, the sheer terror of failure drove me to over prepare for everything. It's a common thing for people wrestling with doubts. We become overachievers, often not out of confidence, but out of fear. The day of the final presentation came. I stood in the boardroom at the bank, my heart pounding, and for most part, it went quite well. But then came the Q&A. One of the managers asked me a question I hadn't seen coming, and I just froze. My mind went completely blank. All I could hear in that moment was the by now familiar voice. You're an imposter. Now they all see it. You're a fraud. You don't belong here. I stumbled through a weak, incoherent answer, and the disappointment in the room was obvious. I didn't get the promotion. That night, I didn't just feel sad, I felt hollow. I sat home looking at all the evidence of my hard work, and I just broke down. But this time, something was different. Through the tears of guilt and frustration, a new feeling started to bubble up, which was anger. I wasn't just angry about the promotion, I was furious at the voice in my head. That voice, it didn't predict my failure, it caused it. It was a self fulfilling prophecy. My fear of appearing incompetent had made me incompetent in that one crucial moment. And in that moment of raw, painful clarity, I realised my inner critic wasn't a wise protector, but sabotaging all of my efforts. It was a liar. It promised me safety, but all it delivered was regret. Its warnings weren't a reflection of reality, they were a distortion, a lens of fear that warped how I saw myself and the world. Psychological research shows that this kind of harsh self criticism is directly linked to anxiety, depression, and avoidance. And I was living evidence of all of that. I knew with a certainty I hadn't felt in years that I couldn't live like this anymore. I was done letting my imaginary tyrant run my life. I didn't know how I was going to change, but I knew I had to. Because the alternative, a life of quiet desperation, of watching my dreams fade, was no longer an option. That night, I don't think I slept very much. I stayed up, and for the first time, I did something about it. I found a book I'd been given quite a while ago. It was called I Can Make You Confident by Paul McKenna, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend. That's a different conversation. But it was the beginning of me doing something about it, which really was the beginning of everything. I threw myself into all things personal development, psychology, behavioral science, and went on a journey of self discovery. And I want to share with you 4 things that I did during this journey that allowed me to silence that inner critic and transform my inner voice from playground bully to biggest advocate that could really help you silence your inner critic as well. Okay, number 1, the first and maybe the most powerful thing I did was to stop identifying with my inner critic and start observing it. For years, that voice felt like me. Its judgments felt like facts. So the first step is to create separation. You have to realize that your inner critic is just a thought pattern. It's not who you are. So I did something that felt a little silly at first, but was a total game changer. I gave my inner critic a name. I called him Nigel. I'm so sorry to all the Nigels out there. I'm sure you are fabulous people. My inner critic was Nigel. I pictured my Nigel as this stuffy, unimpressed butler figure who looked down his nose at everything and everyone. This simple act was revolutionary because it externalized the voice. Suddenly, it wasn't my voice of reason, it was just Nigel, the neurotic butler who was afraid of everything. Now, whenever that wave of negativity would start, I would think, Nigel's here again. Instead of self identifying as a failure, it would be Nigel, is saying I'm not good enough. Nigel is criticizing me. This small shift in language creates a huge psychological space because it lets you be the observer of your thoughts rather than a victim of them. You can't challenge a thought when you believe it's you, but you can absolutely challenge a nagging character named Nigel. So, your first task is this: become aware of your inner critic. Listen to the specific things it says and write them down. What are its greatest hits? You're not smart enough, you're going to fail, nobody will listen to you, no one will like you. What's the things that come up on a regular basis? Then give that voice a name and a persona. Make it a cartoon villain, grumpy gnome, whatever strips away its power and lets you see it for what it is: a repetitive, fear based thought, not the truth. Once I could see Nigel as separate from me, I could start to challenge him. For every criticism he had, I needed a comeback. And this is where psychologist Carol Dweck's work on growth mindsets became my superpower. A fixed mindset, which is the inner critic's native language, assumes our abilities are set in stone. A growth mindset, on the other hand, is the belief that our abilities can be developed and changed through dedication and hard work over time. This became my new operating system. I decided to see every challenge not as a test of my worth, but as a chance to grow. Failure wasn't a verdict anymore, it was just data. So when Nigel would pop up and say, "You can't do that, you'll fail," I learned to argue back. My response would be something like, "Maybe I will fail. And if I do, I'll learn what to do and what not to do next time. This isn't a test, it's just practice." When I made a mistake and Nigel screamed, "You're an idiot!" I'd calmly reply, "I'm not an idiot, I'm learning. Mistakes are proof that I'm trying." The most powerful tool here is two tiny 3-letter words. The first one is yet. I'm not good at public speaking yet. I don't know how to solve this problem yet. That little word transforms a statement of limitation into a statement of progress. It acknowledges where you are without accepting it as a final destination. And the second 3-letter word, and. I'm not good at public speaking yet, and I'm working really hard on doing just that. I'm not as successful as I'd like to be in my business yet, and I know that if I keep working, I will get to where I want to be. This isn't about toxic positivity, it's about shifting your focus from proving yourself to improving yourself. The inner critic loves distorted thinking. It magnifies failures and completely ignores successes. For years, my brain was like a biased prosecutor, only collecting evidence of my flaws. To fight back, I had to become my own defense attorney. I started what I call my evidence journal. And every single day, I'd write down 3 things. Number 1, a success I had had that day, no matter how small. Number 2, an effort I was proud of, regardless of the outcome. And number 3, a compliment I received or a past achievement I remembered. At first, this was incredibly hard. Nigel fought me every step of the way. "That doesn't count, it was easy. You were just lucky. Anyone could have done that." But I forced myself to do it. Some days, a success, honestly, was just getting out of bed when I felt anxious. Didn't matter, I wrote it down. Over weeks and months, this journal became an undeniable record of my competence and resilience. It was physical, tangible proof that directly contradicted my inner critic stories. When I was having a bad day and Nigel was being especially loud, I could literally open this book and say, "Your argument is invalid. Look at the evidence." It retrains your brain to look for the positive, dismantling the negativity and the negativity bias your critic has built over the years. Your task then is to start your own evidence file. Get a notebook or digital document and start tracking your wins, your efforts, and your strengths. Make it a non negotiable daily practice. This file will become one of your most powerful weapons against your inner critic. The final step, and perhaps the most profound, is learning to be kind to yourself. Your inner critic is basically a habit of self abuse. The antidote is self compassion. For so long, I believed that being hard on myself was necessary for success, but research shows the exact opposite is true. Self compassion, not self criticism, is what builds resilience and motivation. I learned to practice self compassion in 3 ways. First, I started treating myself like I would treat a good friend. When a friend messes up, you don't call them a failure. You say, "Hey, that was tough. You did your best. What can we do now?" I started consciously using that same tone with myself. When I made a mistake, instead of letting Nigel take over, I'd pause and ask, what would I say to a friend who was in this situation right now? The answer was always kinder and more constructive, more patient, more empathetic. Second, I recognised our common humanity. The inner critic wants you to feel isolated, like you're the only one who struggles. I made a conscious effort to remember that making mistakes and feeling insecure are universal human experiences. Everyone feels this way at some point. And realizing I wasn't uniquely flawed was incredibly freeing. You are not broken, it's just a system, a pattern of thoughts you've had that can be changed. And third, I practice mindful acceptance. This just means acknowledging painful thoughts and feelings without judging them. Instead of fighting a feeling of anxiety, I would learn to just sit with it and say, okay, this is anxiety. It's uncomfortable, but it's just a feeling. It will pass. It's not me. I didn't associate my identity with it. This stops you from feeling bad about feeling bad. Your final homework is to practice self compassion. The next time you make a mistake, just stop. Take a breath. Ask yourself, what would I say to a friend in this situation? And then say that to yourself. This 4-step process, acknowledge, argue, assemble evidence, and act with compassion, is a continuous practice. It's like mental hygiene, but over time, it will rewire your entire brain. Nigel still visits me, but his voice is just a whisper now. It's not a roar. I can hear him smile and say, not today, Nigel, and get on with my life. So, what does life look like if you're able to do this? What does it look like for me now from what I described earlier? Change has been huge. It touches every corner of my life. The guitars are back out, hanging proudly on the wall just behind the camera. I rarely feel a sense of imposter syndrome anymore, despite pushing myself out in many different directions. Social life's improved no end. But perhaps the biggest transformation of all was the internal one. It's a sense of quiet resilience. Of course, setbacks still happen, but they just no longer send me into this spiral of self loathing. A setback is now just a setback, a data point to learn from, not a verdict on my worth. The voice of self compassion's now my default setting. I've learned that confidence isn't the absence of fear, it's believing you can handle whatever's thrown at you and will learn from it in the process. This very podcast only came about because I realised I was more concerned with giving things a go than about the inner critic. It's knowing you can learn, adapt, and grow no matter what comes your way. What I've shared with you is the journey that changed my life. It's a process of unlearning the habit of self criticism and learning the practice of self compassion. The 4 steps: acknowledge the critic, argue back, build evidence, and practice self compassion. They're not quick fixes, they're tools for building a better relationship with yourself. And what could be better than that? The voice of self doubt can be loud and convincing, but it does not have to be the deciding voice in your life. You have the power to create a new internal narrative, one that encourages and supports you. My journey started with one painful failure and one late night search. Yours can start right here. It starts with deciding that you are worth more than your own harshest criticisms. That's all for today. If you want to find out more about teaming up with me as your coach to help supercharge your own confidence and silence your own inner critic for good, head to joshsuttoncoaching.com. We're going to have a conversation. I'm your coach, Josh Sutton. Let's talk confidence.